Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you. Hope you're having a good 4th of July so far. I had intended to do this video earlier today, but I was up late working on an outline, and I didn't get very much sleep, and then I woke up and I decided to completely scrap that and do something different. It's going to be a lot shorter, though, so good news for you. Anyway, so that said, here we are. And I also, as you can see, I'm wearing my patriotic shirt for 4th of July. If you're listening to this, I got the kitten with the bomb pops and the patriotic bandana. Back when I did professional fireworks shows, I did that for a little over 10 years from college and then on, or I started my freshman year of college. And I would always get like these cheesy patriotic shirts from Walmart or Target or something to wear on the 4th of July. And so I, of course, had to continue that tradition. And so I got this at Walmart like a couple weeks ago. So anyway, today I just want to briefly kind of talk about what is America. You know, we have all of this dialogue going on right now about America is like this, or it is this, or that, or whatever. And I just wanted to kind of give you my 2 cents on what I think America is, and why it's worth understanding. Why it's worth understanding that. But before I do that, I want to tell you a story, really fast. Story about my grandpa and grandma. My grandpa was born in 1912, I believe, in a small Midwestern farming community. He made it to about 8th grade before he dropped out to go help on the family farm. And my grandma made it to 9th grade before she dropped out to go work on the farm as well. And they got married very young, as people did at that time. And things were pretty good. They moved to another small Midwestern farming community. My grandpa got a job at a place that sold farming implements, like for tractors and plows and stuff like that. And things were good. In 1937, they had a son. That was my uncle. He was born. And, you know, again, life was pretty good. It's pretty stable. And that is until about late 1941. Specifically December 7th, 1941, which is Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese Imperial Army bombed our naval fleet at Pearl Harbor, pushing us directly into World War II. Now, at this time, like I said, my grandpa had a really good job working at this implement dealership, and you know, he had a son that was 3.5, almost 4 years old. He'd been married quite a while. He was almost 30 years old. And as soon as we entered World War II, he decided to go and enlist in the Navy. And so he left his good job. He took my grandma and my uncle and went out to California for boot camp. And he spent the entirety of World War II in the Pacific Theater. I forgot the type of ship that he was on. We have a picture of it, I think, at my parents' house. And all of this despite the fact that he couldn't swim, actually. And fortunately made it back, and then my dad was born, and here we are. So why do I tell you that story about my grandpa choosing to leave his good life and good job and security in the middle of the country to go and fight in World War II? Well, I think that story of what my grandpa did there and what so many others did during World War II and at other times throughout our history and world history is actually 2 stories. I think there's 2 stories there that makes that worth considering. And one of them, the first story in that story of my grandpa, is actually the most normal, not necessarily in a good way, but most common story in all of human history. That there is no time in history when this story is not happening and not being written. And the second story is the story of something that's much more rare and much more worthy of, I guess, acknowledging and cherishing throughout human history. So what do I mean? The first story is the story of injustice, the story of oppression, of malice, of evil, of greed, of exploitation. This story has been being written all throughout human history. There's not a point in time in human history where that story is not being told somewhere on the planet. You know, the biblical account of creation, as soon as humans enter the scene, we very quickly are introduced to dishonesty and abdication of responsibility and trickery and, you know, the first humans that are born, according to the Bible, on earth, Cain and Abel, one of them kills the other one. So bloodshed and injustice is a tale literally as old as time. So in that sense, the story of Adolf Hitler is really not that unique in human history. Historians will often say what made Adolf Hitler unique was not his goals, but really the fact that he was one of the first people who had the means to implement his goals on such a wide scale. If you want some more historical examples of people that operated in a similar fashion, I'd encourage you to look up the Mongol Empire in the year 1200 under Genghis Khan and all the things they did. Or you can go back about another 2,000 years and look up the Persian Empire under King Xerxes and what happened there. If you've seen the movie 300, Xerxes' army of slaves, that's historically accurate. And so oppression and all of these things are a constant throughout human history. But the second story that takes place, the one that's a lot more rare in the story of my grandpa, is the story of people who were willing to stand up against that evil, who were willing to stand up and fight against that oppression, against that injustice, right? That is what is unique in human history, is, you will always find atrocities, but you're not always going to look around and find people who are willing to stand up and fight against those atrocities. And so, in the same way, the presence of flawed societies and of flawed men is perfectly ordinary in history. The presence of flawed societies and flawed men seeking to overcome those flaws and those shortcomings and encourage others to do the same, that is what truly stands out in history. That is what truly stands out in history. Every society has its share of flaws, has its share of, skeletons in the closet, if you will. A few examples, people love Denmark, people love Norway today. They like to cheer for those countries. Denmark and Norway had slavery through the end of the 1840s. Okay, another country that we all love today, the Netherlands, they abolished slavery the same year the United States did, the same year as the Emancipation Proclamation. China didn't start working towards abolishing and getting rid of slavery until 1910 in the legal arena. Saudi Arabia and northern Yemen didn't abolish slavery until the early 1960s. And even today, India, China, Moldova, Laos, North Korea, and other countries practice what is effectively forms of slavery today, whether it's human trafficking and sex slavery or work camps where people are like modern gulags, like what the Uyghurs are in China right now. That is effectively slavery, what's happening there right now. They have concentration camps. South Africa had its own form of Jim Crow that went until the early 1990s in apartheid. So I'm not making excuses for these things. I'm just saying evil and injustice are not unique. They're not. They are the tragic story of human history, the brokenness of mankind and the wickedness of the human heart and our capacity to exact evil and malice on our fellow man is not unique in human history. Flawed men are not unique in human history, but people striving to overcome those flaws and to encourage others to do the same, even though they know they are hypocritical in the process, that is what's unique. And that is the story of America and of the American experiment. Jordan Peterson recently kind of emerged on the scene, and he did an interview with his daughter. And one of the things he said in that interview I think is really poignant and appropriate for what we're talking about here. And he said, quote, "If you're waiting to learn something from someone who hasn't made mistakes or had tragedy enter their life, you're going to be waiting a long time to learn something." And that's true. If you're waiting to accept truth from a perfect source, then you're never going to find a truth that you can accept. Imagine the most wicked person on planet Earth. If I had to imagine the most wicked, evil person on planet Earth, and that person said to me, I really think bacon is delicious. Like, I don't like it too crispy, but I like it, with a good amount of crisp where it still has some crunch to it, but, it's not totally soggy. Like, I would say, I agree with that. That's a true statement, regardless of how wicked you are. The biggest liar in the world saying, I think honesty is a good principle. Even if they're lying when they say that, they're still articulating a truth. That true is true regardless of the source of where you're getting it from. And that the Declaration of Independence and the principles laid in the founding of this country are no different than any other truth. That beginning statement of the Declaration of Independence, the 13 colonies unanimously agree to this, that when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary to untether yourself from an unjust government and acknowledging that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these rights is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They're saying all men are worthy of dignity and of freedom and of liberty to pursue their means or their various desires as they see fit, as long as they're not imposing other people's liberty. That's true regardless of how imperfectly our founders were able to enact that in the United States immediately upon saying it. Like, it's true regardless. And that's my point, is that if someone came up to you this evening and said, hey, today really sucked. I had a bad day today. I really screwed up. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't as hardworking as I could have been, and I wasn't as kind as I could have been, and all these other things. You wouldn't really be surprised. You'd say, "Why do you tell me that? Of course you weren't perfect." Like, no one expects that from other people, and no one expects that from themselves, and understandably so, right? Like, you would say, "Okay, well, what can you do better next time? And are you trying to do better? Are you trying to work harder? Are you trying to be more kind? Are you trying to be more giving? Okay, cool. Then let's measure that progress." That is how we treat people that we care about. That is how we treat ourselves, typically. And I think that's how we have to treat America and really any other country. You measure it by how far they go, how much they work to try and overcome human evil, including their own capacity for human evil, including their own history of injustice and oppressions and tyranny, which, again, exists everywhere around the world throughout history, including American history. But you judge them based on their desire and their efforts towards overcoming that and how they encourage us. So my point is that America, I think, and our founding principles and the Declaration of Independence that are articulated there, and then later laid out in the legal form of the Constitution, that those are beautiful. They are often flawed in terms of who created them. But those truths that all people are worthy of dignity are beautiful and true and worthy of us striving towards and acknowledging how unique they are in human history. And they're also fragile. They're so fragile. Benjamin Franklin is rumored to have said after exiting after the Constitutional Convention, when they formed the Constitution, and someone asked him what the framers had created, and he's supposedly said, "A republic, if you can keep it. If you can keep it." And so even then, Franklin and others, other founders, recognized that what they were creating was beautiful and good, but so fragile, so fragile. And so I think we have to acknowledge that and say, look, like, there are, as Douglas Murray says, there's two kinds of criticisms. There are criticisms that you would make towards something you care about, towards something that you like and you want to improve. And then there's criticisms that people make towards things they hate, that they're just using as an argument to destroy that thing. And there are people right now who are engaged in that second kind of criticism. They're just seeking to destroy what we have here because they understand how fragile it is. And there's people who have really good intentions and I think really are trying to make the world a better place that buy into a lot of those arguments. And I think that we have to reject the criticisms that are just trying to destroy what we have here, and embrace criticisms that are seeking to improve and build upon our founding principles, regardless of the flaws of those who laid them out. So I'll end it here, just with a quick story about, Mount Rushmore is in the news. And so I'll tell you about my wife and I. We went to Mount Rushmore a couple years ago for spring break. Super cool place. The Black Hills are really pretty. There's a lot of wineries and breweries there, which of course is a lot of fun. But we went to Mount Rushmore, and it really is, first off, just a sight to behold. It really is a monument to and a testament to human achievement, especially if you consider when it was constructed. So if you're looking at Mount Rushmore and then where you're looking at it from, there's a museum behind you that you go underground into this museum. And it's all about kind of some of the founding principles of the people who are on the face of Mount Rushmore, but it's also about the work that went into it and the people who built Mount Rushmore. And it's remarkable how so many of them were recent immigrants to the United States from all over the world who came to the United States for a better life and then came and worked on constructing Mount Rushmore. They had their own baseball teams, and there was this whole little town that cropped up around the construction of Mount Rushmore. And it has these clippings to, about the time and the people and the various immigrants. Again, Mount Rushmore is a place where we do our naturalization ceremonies, where people who become naturalized citizens of the United States for a reason. It's called a monument to democracy for a reason. And one story in the museum that kind of embodies that, there's this newspaper clipping from this guy who was an immigrant to the United States at that time. And he was, I want to say, in his 80s or 90s. And he learned to read. He was illiterate, like many people were, especially when you consider when he was born, which would have been like the mid to late 1800s. He was illiterate, but he learned to read at the end of his life so he could pass his U.S. citizenship test so he could die a U.S. citizen. And there was this whole newspaper thing celebrating, he had tried to pass it several times, and then he finally did pass it. And he was so proud of the fact that he could die an American citizen. And that story takes place at the same time as when Jim Crow was happening in the United States. And that really is the story of America. It is people acknowledging the worthiness of our founding principles. Again, that's what Martin Luther King did whenever he appealed in his I Have a Dream speech. He said, hey, these are good principles. We're not living up to them. Let's live up to them. And so it's acknowledging that there are good founding principles, but that there is also always going to be work to do on living up to those principles, because we're never going to have a perfect society that perfectly embodies like good, true, worthy, virtuous principles. We can always just be continually striving to live up to those principles and live up to those goals, and seek to fight injustice and fight wickedness, whether it's in ourselves or in our society, and using those principles that we value as the lens with which we are able to say, how are we doing at that? So just like that guy, again, Jim Crow is happening. There was injustice happening in the U.S., but there was also people flocking to the U.S. seeking opportunity because they recognized that it was better than where they were coming from. And there's this old guy who, at the end of his life, he says, I want to become a citizen, and so I can die a U.S. citizen. So I'm going to learn to read at the end of my life so I can die a U.S. citizen, because he acknowledged that the American experiment, whatever it was, good, bad, and everything in between, was still worthy and still worth fighting for and still worth grabbing hold of. And, again, we always are going to have work to do, but we don't throw the whole thing out. So that's my encouragement to you guys, is today is a day that we celebrate the American ideal, the American experiment, and what was laid forth by our founders. Again, that idea that all people are worthy of dignity, that they're all worthy of equal treatment, that they're all worthy of freedom and the ability to pursue their own happiness as they see fit. That is so rare. It's so rare in human history. It's naive for us to think that this is somehow normal. It's not normal. Normal is atrocity and like pure horror. Having this level of freedom, but also still having societal things we have to work on, that is what is the rarity in human history. So let's celebrate that today. Let's celebrate the American ideal, and let's celebrate the people who created this place and who made this possible for all of us, including their flaws. And, let's judge them by the fact that they strove to overcome those flaws, and not by the fact that they had them. Everyone had flaws. I have flaws. I'm not perfect in any means, but I'm still going to try and teach my daughter to be virtuous and have good principles, regardless of the fact that I will be being hypocritical when I encourage her to do that. But it's still worth encouraging. And so that's the story of America. That's my grandpa going and fighting the Nazis, or I guess it would have been the Japanese when he was in the Pacific in World War II. That's the story of America. It's the story of a man learning to read at the end of his life, because this is a place that's worth he being proud of and dying a citizen of. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great 4th of July. I hope you begin to embrace and understand that the American experiment is worth fighting for. And it's okay to criticize it as long as that criticism is in pursuit of making it better and refining it and not destroying it. And that there are people who are trying to do that, unfortunately. It breaks my heart. I love this country, and I'm so thankful to be a citizen here. All right, I feel like I've probably just been rambling for the last 5 minutes, so I'm going to cut it off here. Have a great 4th of July. Happy birthday, America. I hope you stay safe. I hope you have a good time with your friends and your family. And I hope that today, and hopefully going forward, you begin to appreciate a little bit more about what we have here. Again, look up any time in human history. It's always characterized by oppression and injustice. There's always been barbarians at the gate. There's always been people seeking to conquer and to enslave and to oppress and to exploit and to kill. That's the constant. The variable is people on the wall willing to fight those people, willing to say no, and willing to protect protect us from that oppression. Anyway, and that's what I think our founders laid forth, even if it was done imperfectly, or done by imperfect men. Anyway, all right. Thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe. This is the kind of thing you're into. My YouTube channel is at Return to Reason. My website, returntoreason.locals.com. I got a community going on over there. It's really cool. We got conversations. I make really stupid, poorly created memes on my phone. I post there. So I encourage you to go become a member of that community over there. And there's a lot of other communities that are worth joining. So I'd encourage you to do that. Please follow me on Twitter. That's at My Mundane Mind. I have stuff on Medium under Return to Reason. I have some articles there that you might find interesting. And that's it. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a happy 4th of July. Peace.